Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Carbon Hour podcast. And today we'll be talking climate and the environment and discovering a bit more about our guest today, Mark Stevens. How are you today, Mark?
Yeah, I'm great, Ben. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you as well. We've just caught up before we went live, and telling me all about living in the Bahamas and getting a lovely bit of sun, a bit warmer than what we've got here in the UK right now.
Yeah, 33 degrees C yesterday.
Oh, it's lovely.
And,
That's lovely.
32 today.
What sort of temperatures does it sort of reach over there in the Bahamas?
Yeah, that's what it can get up to in the summer. So we're just at the start of the summer. It's not usually this hot in May, to be honest, but hopefully, it's just a heat wave that will pass.
Sure.
Yeah. How is it over there?
Nice. It's
a bit warmer.
We're getting some unusual sun, which for the UK, is it comes and goes very quickly. But yeah, some lovely bit of summer for the UK right now, which trying to sort of get the most out of it whilst I can.
Yeah. Hopefully it lasts for a few months.
Indeed. I do have a general question before we kickstart things, or a couple of them. So for yourself, Mark, from traveling, working, or holidaying in other countries, what is the one thing from another country or culture that you'd love to have in the UK?
Well, there are quite a few things. The obvious ones would be, the weather. Although then we may not have much to talk about. I know it's a good conversation starter in the UK. But I think the main thing is I want to see more forests.
Yeah.
But obviously, the UK pioneered the Industrial Revolution, and it needed to cut down a lot of trees to help with fuel that. And obviously before that, the agricultural period where a lot of forests were cleared for farmlands. And so, for example, in West Yorkshire, where I come from, I love hiking in the Peak District, but still, I'd love to see more trees. And obviously it helps towards, storing more carbon, and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a great one. I think for me, public services is a massive one as well that I've sort of come across. When I was in Dubai last year, all the taxis are state run, so it's all fixed prices. There's no bartering. You know what you're getting. And even though the roads are a bit crazy and some wild driving out there, there's never any road rage, which is fantastic. But also, in terms of the food and drink there, traditional Arabic tea is something I experienced for the first time there, and Arabic sweets, often with fruit in them as well. And that was lovely. So that was a really good trip. And also I had Switzerland when I went there. I've never had a smoother train ride than in Switzerland. And they do public transport fantastically. So I think public services is something that I think a lot of other countries do very well.
Yeah. I've never been to Middle East. Well, sorry, no, I've been to Turkey. So yeah, I'm familiar with the good food in that region.
Yeah, there's some delights. There. Taking a swift look over at blockchain. I'm not sure how well versed you are in blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies, but what are your thoughts on cryptocurrencies and blockchains such as Bitcoin and Cardano?
Yeah, I'm not a big expert. I've read up on it a little bit. But I get the impression it could help with efficiency in making payments. I get the idea that it decentralizes the system.
Yeah.
For Bitcoin, I tend to hear more about it as an investment platform rather than what it's intended for.
Yes.
And I've read that Cardano is much more environmentally friendly.
Indeed. Yeah. Yes, and we've talked in previous podcasts as well about the energy consumption for Bitcoin and how in its peak, it was consuming more energy than Argentina as a whole.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. Is it something that you think you may sort of look into a bit further in the future?
It's something that I'd like to include in my teaching. So I taught an economic geography class last year, and yeah, it's something I'd like to engage with the students more. And there is a cryptocurrency in the Bahamas. They got the sand dollar.
Okay.
And yeah, it's something to be aware of. I can see it coming more and more. I've not invested in anything like that. But yeah, I think with this kind of thing, it's just learning more about it. And yeah, what do you think? Is it a good thing to invest in?
I mean, I would never offer any financial advice, but I think the technology has a lot of benefits. And if we're looking at the environmental side of things, if we look at carbon credits, for example, being able to put them on the blockchain and make it a lot more transparent, and be able to follow it back to the source, essentially, I think that's incredibly important, because there's been a lot of suggestions of like rogue projects that haven't existed, or have miscalculated, probably deliberately, how much carbon credits they should be receiving. So I think transparency is a big thing. I think in terms of supply chains as well, that's a big thing, where we're trying to look at the scope 3 of carbon footprints and trace it from source through to the end users. That's something that we can use the blockchain for in a very good way. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there for the technology. Like I said, people do speculate and try and earn a bit more money. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Cool. So for all our viewers, I'm very, very pleased to introduce the listeners to Mark, who has a PhD in geography with fieldwork and thesis on long-term environmental and climatic change, deciphered from archaeological sediments in Borneo. Previously a senior lecturer in physical geography in the University of the South Pacific in Fiji, and is currently an associate professor of geography at the University of the Bahamas. Mark, I'll let you continue. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, so I'm currently in the Bahamas, but as you mentioned, I did previously work at the University of the South Pacific in Fiji, and also University of Botswana. So I've been around the world a bit. I did my PhD at Royal Holloway, University of London, and before that I did a MSc Quaternary Science in the same institution. Before that, a bachelor's in Environmental Science at University of Wolverhampton in the UK. So all my education was in the UK. I feel blessed for gaining, that education, and for the scholarships I received that enabled me to, take this journey. And yeah, it really started from growing up in West Yorkshire in a village called Scapegoat Hill, which is quite an interesting name. And I had wonderful views of the hills and valleys over the nearby town Huddersfield.
Yep.
And yeah, it just got me interested in geography. You're close to the elements. I remember walking to primary school and the wind being so strong that you could hardly breathe. So yeah, I went to a normal state-run school, Newsham High School, which had wonderful views of a landmark in Huddersfield called Castle Hill.
Yep.
And again, I remember having my geography class, looking out the window and seeing Castle Hill, which is a 4,000-year-old fort. And how can you not get interested in that sort of thing?
Absolutely.
And then went to Huddersfield New College for my A levels. I remember we did a field trip to France, down to Montpellier, Livieux, saw the rock formations that they call karst. It's where the rock is dissolved by water so that you get these smooth, rounded features. And that's actually ended up being one of my specialities in research, is studying karst, but particularly where you find caves. So you mentioned those archaeological deposits. So I was studying cave deposits, and you can get layers of sediments laid down by streams or wind-blown deposits, and it can tell you something about how the environment's changed over time.
Yeah.
You can use dating techniques like radiocarbon dating. I attempted luminescence dating, to work out how old the deposits are. And I could say more about the project, but basically the cave was first excavated by somebody called Tom Harrison in the 1940s, 1950s, I think. And him and his wife, Barbara Harrison, he was not trained in archaeology. He was interested in birds, actually. And he was also in the military. That's how he was a commander during the war there. So he got interested in Borneo. And then they dug down about 11 meters looking for evidence of early humans.
Yeah.
And they used radiocarbon dating, and they found that the deposits were 40,000 years old. But that's the limit. That's the limits of the radiocarbon technique at the time. So in the literature, you're not sure if it really is 40,000 or could it be even older. So part of the project, was to reassess the age of that. And we found out that it was indeed true that the deposits are around that age. And at the time, though, when they found that, I think that was the earliest Homo sapiens on the planet, they thought. But now we know that was the earliest Homo sapiens in Southeast Asia, the evidence for that. Yeah.
Impressive. And you mentioned luminescence dating. What exactly is that?
Yeah, that's where you try to work out how old the sediments are. Say some grains of sediment like quartz. Quartz is a really common mineral. Say it gets washed or blown into the cave mouth.
Yeah.
And then essentially when it's exposed to sunlight, the internal lattice of the quartz vibrates, it releases electrons, and it's like resetting the clock of that mineral. And then as the quartz grain is buried in the sediments with natural background radiation that we're all exposed to, and it's in the soil, it's almost like the clock starts ticking and electrons start to build up within the quartz. And so you can take a sample in a tube that keeps it dark, take it to a lab, you stimulate it with optical light, and that releases then the electrons. So then you count the electrons with a device, and you can work out how old it is based on how many electrons get released, and also by dividing it by background radiation.
Wow.
Yeah, it's real detective work.
Yeah, big time. And if we're looking at carbon dating versus luminescence dating, which is more accurate, which is more reliable?
It just depends on the material you have, because you will use radiocarbon dating on organic. Obviously, carbon is organic, isn't it? So, say pieces of wood are quite common to be used, possibly shell as well. But for luminescence, you use it on grains of mineral grains like quartz or feldspar. So now radiocarbon today, I think you can date back as far as 50 or 60,000 to really push the boundaries back. But with luminescence, you can go even further back. Wow. So it also depends on the age of the deposits you're trying to date.
Yes, yeah. And just going back as well to your the school life and you mentioned going on field trips and that inspiring you. How important do you think field trips and school trips are to opening the opportunities out to kids and sparking something in them?
Oh yeah, it's huge. I mean, it's so necessary. Obviously in the school, the kids might be getting the theory, but then by going into the fields, you can see how it's applied, and it just brings it to life. Yeah, and you see things that can make you think, and also in field work, you can do real research. You can take measurements. You've got equipment. You can take measurements of things like soil, the rocks, the water, the air, and you could also do interviews with local people on their perceptions of things like climate change or the impact of tourism on a settlement. And also what I've noticed is students, they like field work. Yeah. And by the end of a field trip or a field course, you've just got to know each other a lot better. You just feel more, and I've seen students, really make friends through doing that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I completely agree. From my limited sort of school trips, and when I'm looking back, I completely agree with that. And I think it's one of those where you get out of the classroom, and like you said, theory is one thing, but then going out into the real world and seeing it and seeing how it's how the impacts of that subject, it's really interesting. And I think when you get back in the classroom and when you write your reports and everything, you feel almost rejuvenated and you feel a bit more inspired and happier to be in that classroom environment again, because you've been out there and you're ready to write about it.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think it's necessary. I know there are some issues with health and safety, of course. You have to make sure they don't stand too close to the edge of a blue hole or a ravine or something. And so that's an aspect as well, of course, that there's the university or school administration has to come to grips with. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to your PhD as well, Mark, that took you to Borneo, where you're looking at archaeological sediments. What can you tell us about that and what you learned?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Well, it's a while ago now, actually. I just realized I finished my PhD 20 years ago.
Oh, nice. Happy anniversary.
20 years ago. Yeah, thanks. And so from what I can remember, I just remember being excited about going to Borneo. It's one of the reasons why I chose to do that one. I was offered it by my PhD supervisor at the time. Well, I just finished my master's and I was looking to do a PhD. I was offered one in Leeds, which was closer to home, but I was offered one where I'd just done my master's in Royal Holloway in Surrey. And yes, it was continuing with the same supervisor. And one of the project members was actually at the University of Huddersfield at the time. And it just sounded quite exciting. I'd never been to Borneo. I'd not really had much experience of studying caves as well. So I wanted to do, learn something new. And yeah, so obviously got the chance to go there. I went there 3 times, 3 field seasons, each time for about 2 weeks.
Wow.
And it took a lot of adjustments. Now, I've got used to warm weather now, but that was my first kind of introduction to tropical weather. And Sarawak, where that's North Borneo, it's actually just 3 degrees north of the equator.
Oh, wow.
So it's properly hot and humid all year round. And almost every day you had a torrential downpour, the monsoon.
Yeah.
Around midday, then again about late afternoon.
Yeah.
And just having to drink enough water, watching out for creepy crawlies and snakes and crocodiles when you go out on the boats. But I do remember doing some sampling in the mangroves, and I've done quite a bit of mangroves work in the Bahamas recently, but that was my first experience of mangroves, which are these plants that you find in the tropics along coastlines, and they're very good at protecting a coastline from storm surges, say from hurricanes or cyclones or just storms, even tsunamis, because they've got these strong roots that hold the sediment in place. And then I was sampling in the mangroves for mollusk shells. These are snail shells, because in the cave, in the archaeological sediments, there are lots of snail shells, mollusk shells, that the prehistoric people were eating. That was a big, they were harvesting snails and just throwing them into the back of the cave, like as a refuse rubbish pit at the back of the cave. And so I was studying the modern shells to see if, by studying the chemistry of the modern shells and comparing it to the chemistry of the prehistoric shells, could I say anything about things like how was the rainfall 20,000 years ago compared to today? But I do remember sampling some shells and looking up into the mangroves above, and there was this yellow-green coloured snake curled up just about 1 meter above my head. And so I very carefully took my sample and got back into the boat.
Pretty sharpish, I'd imagine. Yeah,
I think he was sleeping because it was like midday.
Okay. I was lucky for you.
Yeah.
But do you think, taking that leap, going somewhere completely different, going to Borneo, to do your PhD?
Yeah.
Is that what sort of set you off and where you thought, I like traveling, going to new places and working in new places? Did that kickstart that?
No, it was before that actually.
Oh.
It was actually okay. The first time I went abroad, I think, was the A-levels field trip to France.
Yeah.
I think that was for a week, and then I did a holiday with some friends to Prague for a couple of weeks. And then in the second year of my undergraduate degree, there was this opportunity for, I think it was an Erasmus-funded kind of, where you could go and do your final year project in another country in Europe. And we had a choice. You could choose between Finland, Norway, and a couple of other countries. I don't remember now. And two of my good friends on the course, or a few of them actually, they were signing up for it. And I was a bit cautious, like, I'd not really traveled much, and I didn't even think much about what project I was going to do. And but they'd signed up, so I thought, well, okay, let me think about this. And they said to me, "Are you doing it?" I thought, well, and sometimes, quite often, it's natural for us to think about what's the worst that can happen before we have a big decision to make. And I was thinking, I might get kidnapped. The mafia might get hold of me somehow. And but it was like, I remember talking to a family member, and they said to me, "No, just do it, just do it." And I thought, okay, let me think about this. So I signed up for it. Two of my friends were deciding to go to Finland, and I thought, okay, don't know anything about Finland really. Yeah, why not? There's a good chance to spend time with, my good friends on the course. So I signed up for that, and that was one of the best experiences of my life. It's up there because it was 3 months, and we were given this scholarship to pay for the accommodation, the flights, and a bit of spending money. And so it was wonderful because it was such a clean environment. So when you asked me earlier about what I would take to the UK, Finland is covered in forests.
Yes.
Although the primordial forests in Finland are mostly in the national parks. They do have a big forestry program. They have a big pulp industry there. Yeah. And I was studying lake sediments and so that's what got me interested in environmental history. Okay. I was studying. So we went out on a boat with a coring device. You send it into the water. It's got a cylinder that sinks into the mud, and it has a trap door in it that you can activate. You pull up the coring device and then take it to the laboratory, analyze the different layers, a bit like tree rings. You can look at the layers of how things have changed through time. I used geochemistry, sedimentological techniques, and looked at things like how pollution had changed over time. But that environment there is very clean. Finland, I think it's only got 5 million people, and it's a big country. So I was impressed with the cleanliness of the environment. And we were very lucky. It was a very warm summer. I think Finland's generally a bit rainy and cold, but we had a really good summer. And once I'd done that, I thought, wow, I can do this traveling abroad, and it's a really good experience. You learn a lot. Yeah. And so that propelled me forward, really.
Awesome. That's fantastic. In terms of working in some of these more sort of arid and remote climates, what are some of the most challenging aspects of trying to conduct research in these areas?
Yeah, it's several things. First of all, it's the logistics, because particularly if you're running the project, you need to make a lot of calls, meet people. I remember in Fiji, before every field trip that I took, when I took students on field trips, I would have to go to the village first with a bundle of kava, which is a root plant. Well, they crush up the root and make a drink out of it. It's a traditional thing that you do, and so I'd always have to make sure I go to the market, buy the kava, and that would be part of the budget. So I'd create a budget and go and do that. Then I'd have to travel to the village, which sometimes might be 3 or 4 hours going up into the hills, in remote areas. I'd have to take a 4-wheel drive, meet with the chief. I'd call him beforehand so he knows I'm coming. We'd do a carver ceremony where I get to drink the carver. And you have a discussion. I'd take a student with me who can speak the local language, and basically met my request to do the work. So it's not like in the UK where you just probably just ring somebody up, wouldn't you, and say, look, I want to do this field work, can we do it? So this added layer of, what can I say? But it smooths over the whole event, because you go there knowing that you've got their acceptance and they know what to expect. And, it's a nice way of doing things. And then in general, otherwise, it is things like the weather, the challenges, the physical exertion. I've just been doing field work here in the Bahamas and in the mangroves, and it's involved trekking for several hours, kayaking for several hours to reach sites that we can set up transects for ecological monitoring. And I've been on field work in Armenia where we used horses to go up the mountains.
Wow.
I remember one day it was raining really heavily and cold, but we were so determined to do some field work, because for several days we couldn't do any field work. It was just rainy and misty, and I think we got a bit bored sat in the accommodation. I thought, let's just try it, so we did that. So yeah, it's definitely, I think it helps if you have an adventurous spirit to do geography fieldwork and to enjoy being outdoors, which I do, being close to nature.
Oh, 100%. In those experiences, it sounds, fascinating where you have to have that sort of social engagement to sort of gain access to the lands from the locals. Have you ever been refused access, from a local?
Well, interestingly, I was refused, and it was in the UK.
Okay.
I've never been refused in these where I've worked abroad. Wow. Now in the UK, though, it was a political thing where I worked as a project officer at the University of Leicester. This was after my PhD for something called the National Ice Age Network. Okay. It was a wonderful job where I had to visit all of the sand and gravel quarries, including in Lincolnshire. Okay. So that was my trip to Lincolnshire. All of the sand and gravel quarries in eastern England. And so I went to some fascinating places. Like I remember Sandy Quarry, I think that's in Bedfordshire, where the quarry manager had found a hand axe that was indicative of Neanderthals 30,000 years ago. We actually ended up publishing that. And all around Leicestershire, visited the sand and gravel quarries. Some of them had deposits of ancient rivers that flowed through Britain. Some of them are precursors to the River Thames.
Yeah.
Some of these, you find in hand axes river gravels that could be 1 million years old. So the archaeology in Britain is so ancient. It's wonderful. And but it just got a bit political because, of course, sand and gravel quarries were worried. Some of them were worried that if you find archaeology, it's going to hold up their operations.
Okay.
So the National Ice Age Network kind of it had a lot of challenges, but we made some good contacts with quarry managers. We did manage to visit a good number, but some I didn't personally get rejected, but it was more at a higher level. There was a lot of political challenges with that. But yeah.
No, but very, very interesting. And that is always the case, always the issue when there's money on the table, there's money at risk, for these multi-million-pound, potentially billion-pound companies. Then so money trumps history in their eyes. Whereas I think many others, including myself, would disagree.
Yeah, I mean, but it is the law that if archaeology is found, that it has to be rescued. Call it rescue archaeology, where they go in and do a rapid assessment and excavation. But in general, I think I remember some quarry managers, they were genuinely interested in it, and they'd quite often have a large plastic bag full of bones in the back of their office. One quarry manager, he brought out huge mammoth teeth, which are like breeze blocks kind of size.
Wow.
and bones of the woolly rhinoceros that lived in Britain. It's just fascinating. Hippo, can you believe it? Hippo was in Britain.
Okay.
The remains of lion have been found in, believe it or not, I think it's Trafalgar Square excavations in London. I think it's certainly hippo. Even in Yorkshire, Victoria Cave, the remains of hippo. So it's fantastic.
I would never have imagined. That's it's fascinating.
Mm.
So for yourself, Mark, you've obviously got a wealth of experience, teaching physical geography, and for you, how has your personal, thoughts and methods of teaching changed from when you first started out to now?
Okay, so from my first lecturing job.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I remember my first lecturing job, University of the South Pacific. I was actually offered a postdoc in England at a very prestigious university, and but I thought, well, I've already done 2 years of postdoc. Let me have a go at being a lecturer. I thought it'd be a good challenge.
Yeah.
So I was offered this job, University of the South Pacific, Fiji. Again, didn't know much about Fiji. Read up about it a bit. It's completely the other side of the planet. If you look on an atlas, in the South Pacific, and so when I went out there, and I'd not done that much teaching, lecturing before, so it was really quite interesting, because most of my classes were 100 students or more. One class once was 220 students.
Wow.
She'd have this vast lecture hall, and it's hot as well. It's a tropical climate, but
Yeah.
the buildings were designed that you'd have these louvers on the walls where the airflow, and it was a wonderful campus. I was based on the lower campus, which was you literally had the view of the ocean. You're next to the ocean, and so on your lunch break, you go to this cafe. You're next to the South Pacific Ocean, and so that sticks in my mind. I'm teaching in these huge lecture theatres, and then just try to learn them, because I remember one course I was teaching Pacific geoscience, and obviously I'd done my PhD in my research in Borneo, so I knew something about the geoscience there, but perhaps not particularly about Fiji or the other islands in that region. So I just remember preparing my lectures the night before. I just didn't have any time, I'd just be up all night preparing them using the textbook, and then the next day preparing them. And then in my second semester, it was a summer course, and so it was the same, I'd be up all night preparing them and then giving them. And I remember once, it was quite a coincidence. I was about to teach a lecture on tropical cyclones, which is basically a hurricane, this very powerful winds that can get up to 150 miles an hour, even more, that occur in the tropics. And that next day, there was a tropical cyclone warning, and the tropical cyclone came through, so we had to postpone the class. And I remember being in the hotel in this was on the west side of Viti Levu Island, the main island of Fiji, in a town called Lautoka. And I was in the hotel there, and all the lights were off, the power was off because of the cyclone, the rain was hitting the windows, lampposts were bent over with the wind, the trees were blown down, telegraph poles blown down. And I just remember everyone went down to the reception area of the hotel, just to kind of huddle together and feel a little bit safe amongst others. And but it blew over in about 2 or 3 days. I remember there was a break in the storm, when the eye of the storm passes over and it gets calm, and it can give you a false sense of security. I remember quite a few kids were running out in the streets then and splashing around in the water playing. And then the storm came back again. Then everyone ran back inside, and but luckily, we survived it. So it was quite a very interesting, challenging, but wonderful experience, really.
Brilliant. And looking at the sort of advances in sort of technology, how has that transformed the field of physical geography?
Yeah, massively. It's very advanced now and technological, and that's come in the last few decades. I mean, originally the early geomorphologists, well, some of the earliest geomorphology, you can trace it back to about, I think it's about 1000 AD. So say over 1,000 years ago. I think some of the earliest observations, I think one of the earliest ones was by a Chinese man, and he observed marine sediments on the top of a mountain. And he thought, how do you get marine sediments on the top of a mountain? There's something going on here. Either you had a huge flood that was hundreds or thousands of meters above sea level, or the mountains have moved. Like in geology, we call it uplift. And now we know that through plate tectonics and the movement of the plates, that you can indeed get mountains pushed up through that. I mean, of course, you can get floods as well, but floods tend to cause deposits that might be just a few meters above the normal situation, and not hundreds or thousands.
Yes.
So things like that. And then you've had geomorphologists, somebody called W.M. Davis. He proposed a cycle of landscape change with uplift, and the rivers cut down, and then you get landslides, and then you end up with a flat kind of landscape until it gets uplifted again, and so for a long time geomorphology was just very descriptive. So we say geomorphology. Geo is the earth, morph is the shape, study of the shape of the earth. And it so obviously involves all those factors: geology, climate, and human impacts. But now, so for myself, we use cutting edge geoscientific methods for my PhD at the time, like stable isotopes on mollusk shells, even attempted it on stalactites in the cave. And then, like I said, we tried luminescence dating.
Yeah,
and that's a cutting edge technique. Micromorphology of cave sediments. I've done some of the first studies of cave sediments under the microscope. I think actually I've probably done the most detailed. I was the first one to do detailed micromorphological studies of tropical cave sediments. It had been done before me, but not in so detailed a manner, and not so much work that had gone into it, and taking, we call it photomicrographs, taking photographs of the sediments that are under the microscope, because we really wanted to understand these sediments. You go into the cave and you look at the layers from where you've got an excavation, got all these different colors. You've got some sediments that are red, some that are yellow, some that are grayish colored, and you first look at it, you think, what does this mean? And by studying it for several years and using geological principles, you get an idea. But physical geography now, wow, I mean, it's a lot of it's modeling. It's really high level calculations, algorithms. They're even using artificial intelligence now for modeling, predicting, but also using studies from the past to help validate. And obviously GIS, Geographic Information System, studying things using maps. So it's interesting.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. And talking about doing the first and everything, what's been your best experience, or your proudest moment since working in the field of physical geography?
I can think of two from the early days. I think first was my first proper publication, and that was from my master's degree, where I did my research study in the Ukraine, and I spent 2 weeks traveling around the Ukraine. And I know it's obviously in the news a lot now, but and a lot of places they talk about in the news that I've been to, because we did the field work. We started off in Lviv in the northwest.
Yeah,
that's a forested area. It's in the Carpathian Mountains are there. It's a beautiful area, and we traveled down through the country just to the southwest of Ukraine, Gosh, the name will come to me.
Moldova?
Moldova, that's, yeah. So we went to the capital of Moldova, went to some quarries there to look at the sediments that were exposed. Then we went down to the Black Sea coast. I did my study in Primorskoye. And so we went down the Dnieper and the Dniester river valleys, looking at, again, the sediments exposed. And we were looking at basically ancient land surfaces. You can see these ancient soils called paleosols. And it gives you an idea of long-term climate change going back hundreds of thousands of years.
Okay.
And so my first publication was on a cliff section on the Black Sea coast. And yeah, I used a technique called magnetic susceptibility. And by analyzing the sediment layers and intervening soil layers, so the wind-blown sediments were deposited during ice ages, and then you get these soils forming during warm periods like we have now, the interglacials, and try to look at how that changes across the landscape. So that first publication, I felt good getting that. And then secondly was in University of the South Pacific, where I was supervising a master's student, and she started to have, well, she was kind of, she had a lot of challenges, and for various reasons, I ended up supervising her. She'd already been in the institution a few years, and she had quite a few challenges, and it basically involved her coming to my office every day, I think for 2 months, where I would sentence by sentence, go through her thesis with her, correcting things, making things make sense. She was actually suffering from mental health issues, and okay, she got to a situation where, I just had to help her out as best I could, and literally sentence by sentence, helping it to make sense. And thankfully she passed, and it was a wonderful piece of work. And so I'm just so pleased that she could complete that. And any other big achievements? Obviously getting the PhD, and then just the places I've been employed. So it's just been such I've just felt so grateful to be employed at these national universities in these different countries. So yeah, it's always been an honor, really.
Yeah. That's amazing. And I think that's the one good thing about teachers is you are developing the next generation, and that bit of sort of one-on-one work, that very in-depth one-on-one work, that's incredible. That's a huge effort from your part as well. So I mean, hats off to you for that. That's really good.
Yeah, thank you. It's part of it that I enjoy, working with the students, and like you say, it's the next generation. So yeah, you just try your best to pass on what you've learned.
Brilliant. And talking of the next generation, and this is the final question before you take a brief segue over to climate change. What advice would you give to students or young professionals who are interested in pursuing a career in physical geography?
Yeah, I'd really strongly encourage you to do that, because the climate crisis, and it's not just rising temperatures, of course, the impact on landscapes in the tropics here, the impacts on coral reefs, which are essential for fisheries. So it's got a knock-on effect for livelihoods. And in somewhere like the UK, climate change, it's going to affect, obviously, increased number of storms, flooding. Long term, there could be a drying effect. So the more that people get interested in it and can do something about it and can help influence policy, it's great. And also, there are some worries about artificial intelligence taking over long term. Of course, this might take many decades.
Yeah.
But doing something in the field, I don't think that can be replaced. And and you learn so much. You you get in touch with nature, which is something in the technological world, we've been losing in the last few centuries, I would say.
100% agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know if you've seen that sort of thing. Have you noticed people getting more interested in it in the UK?
Yeah, and I think it's one of those where, I think just touch on that last point, because we have everything to hand nowadays: mobiles, tablets, PCs. We can see the world from a phone or a computer. But the actual act of going out there, hiking, trekking, seeing the different cultures, seeing the different ecosystems, the different wildlife, it's unrivaled. You can see pictures and videos, but you will having that first-hand experience and contact with life and the environment and everything that's out there. I think it's unrivaled. So I think it's that sort of career that I think just sounds amazing. And I think maybe if I was to look back, that's maybe something that I would have probably is something I'd have sort of gone into myself. So
yeah. But it sounds like you're getting into that sort of thing there.
Yeah, a bit later on in life, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So
cool. So we will segue over to climate change. But that was fascinating. Really, really great to hear about your story. And yeah, and I'm sure those that are going to watch this back are definitely going to think the same as well. So thank you for sharing all of that. It was fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's been really enjoyable. And yeah, hopefully it might inspire some people to get more interested in the environment. And yeah, it's obviously the challenge for this century.
That's it. I'm sure it will. So looking at climate change, and today we're going to discuss very briefly the global view of climate change. Now, the world is driven by global politics, and obviously the West is very influential when it comes to leading certain changes as well, based on its ability to lead with capital investment first and foremost, and obviously where they determine the priorities lie. So my question, firstly, is: do you think that, generally speaking, aside from experiencing some record-breaking temperatures and maybe a bit of a drought, there are no significant changes to way of life within the collective West, and so that it's not being viewed as seriously as it should be, because obviously all the data points to what we've got to, or not look forward to, what we're going to experience with the significant changes of through climate change. But do you think that because we don't experience a vast amount right now, that it's not taken as seriously as it should in the West?
Probably. Certainly. I think now, because it's taught in schools, isn't it? And I don't remember at school learning about climate change. It's something that in the last decade or two, and but I think more and more people, realizing it just through these increased storm events and floods and long-term impacts. So yeah, I think it's true that probably in the West, people have not seen it as such an urgency. But of course, rising sea levels will affect somewhere like London, right? I mean, I know it's got the Thames Barrier, but long term, I mean, if the sea levels rise several meters, then it will impact these major cities like London, Shanghai, New York, and then it's human nature, isn't it? Sometimes we do things when we really have to.
Yeah.
And but yeah, in other parts of the world where there are just lower lying areas, then they are much more impacted. And I think it's Kiribati and Tuvalu in the South Pacific. I was teaching students from those countries, and they were literally in tears, when they were handing in some of their assignments. I do remember one particular student when I was asking them about one of their assignments, and they'd written one about sea level rise, because some of their communities had to they're basically climate change refugees, and they've had to move to other countries. Like I know the first climate change refugees were the Carteret Islanders, and that's an atoll in Papua New Guinea. So they had to move to the mainland, and I think for some of the other South Pacific nations, they've even been moved to Fiji. So just imagine, part of your nation just having to move to another nation,
Yeah,
and you become an immigrant essentially.
100%.
And so also there's a lot of implication for geopolitics, and obviously where I'm now in the Bahamas, there's a lot of low-lying areas, so it's a big issue. There's a lot of fear around it, understandably, and yeah, obviously it's the elephant in the room, isn't it? It's what everyone has to be focusing on now. So it is sad to see these wars that are going on, and billions of dollars being poured into them. I know it's easy to say, isn't it? Why can't we all get along and let's deal with the real issues? And this grab for resources, well, it'll be kind of meaningless in the end if we can't deal with this climate change problem.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And you mentioned climate refugees as well. It's something where people don't really think about it now, because it's not as big a deal as what it has the potential to be. Like you said, in certain like remote areas, have to move, like you say, from Tuvalu to Fiji. But that's experience there, and unfortunately, that sort of experience and that story isn't shared as globally, or felt as globally as it should, because it's more of a tell of things to come. So
yeah, and I don't think anyone on the planet is protected. Doesn't matter where you are.
No, and like you said, London, the UK, Netherlands, severely at risk when it comes to rising sea levels.
Yeah, and there are all these things are happening, and it's the first time in human history that we've got a good idea of what's going to happen in the next 50 to 100 years. So we've got this crystal ball now, so to speak.
Yeah,
and it's just, let's do something about it. And why are we still driving combustion engine vehicles?
absolutely.
So
moving on to my second question, and this is more sort of like direct towards yourself, your personal sort of experiences. So you've traveled and lived in multiple countries, of significantly different cultures. What's different in the way that they view climate change and the environment, and is there anything that we can learn from them?
I think people perceive things differently, different environments, different cultures, different histories, traditions, mythologies, even. And so I would say, if you're in a country that's low lying and you're hearing about sea level rise, and then you see it in your lifetime, and you start to believe it, and you realize that it is happening, then it's going to create fear. And so then there are projects to build seawall defenses, but it can be very expensive, or you can build the land upwards, but I've also seen some interesting initiatives where they're actually building floating homes. That's been pioneered in Amsterdam, actually.
Okay.
And they've been dealing with this issue for decades, centuries. So, but I think it's the Maldives. I saw a documentary that they're trialing these floating platforms. So for the UK, I would say, the UK is quite an innovative country. We're kind of blessed with that, and through having gone through the agricultural, the industrial revolution, the information age, some of the top universities in the world, and all this research that's going on, and it's taking these projections seriously of what's going to happen, and just being prepared for that. And Also, I would say, like in these tropical countries I've worked, I've seen some. There's what can I say? That kind of community spirit that you might see in a village that's in the highlands somewhere.
Yes, yeah,
And just that, yeah, that kind of. I think probably we just need to help each other out. I think
yeah.
particularly through difficult periods, through economically difficult periods, and so on. Just be aware of our neighbours, and yeah.
Do you think some of these more remote communities and groups are more connected with like the environment as well?
Yeah, they tend to be, particularly if you're directly getting your resources. Say, every day you've got to go out fishing, or
Yeah,
every few days, and you've got a farm next to your village that you're really relying on. You really hope that a cyclone doesn't come through and destroy your farm. Then there is that natural connection to nature, and just having intact forests nearby, and also maybe some stories that have been passed down through the generations. But we have that in the UK as well. There are these myths, which that I think are good and interesting. Like, I don't know if you've heard of the major mythology for Britain. One of them is obviously related to King Arthur and Parsifal, where in one part of the myth he has a joust with a pagan knight, and they have this joust, and the pagan knight, who represents nature, is killed, and Parsifal is castrated.
okay.
So that's one telling of the story. I'm not making it up. You can read into it. And this is from the 12th century. So
Yeah,
it's almost like a prophecy, how nature is killed, really, or devastated. And we suffer in the technological world through, in psychology, they call it your feeling function,
yeah,
is and that ability to relate, to empathize. And when we lose touch with nature, when we lose the forests, that's known as the feminine kind of quality as well. And men in the Western world come under a lot of criticism for being too macho, or so that mythology seems to be playing out.
yeah. That's an interesting one for sure. That's a good one. And my final question for yourself, Mark. What do you believe are the key challenges and opportunities in promoting geoconservation globally?
Yeah, some of the challenges. Now, that's something I've got really interested in, because studying these archaeological sites, which can include caves, blue holes, interesting geological features, or it could be an interesting hill that's got an interesting, it can be a myth attached to it, or some old archaeological sites. And I've noticed we do that very well in the UK, how you got these SSIs, sites of specific scientific interest, that are protected, and we've got wonderful information panels everywhere. When I go up to the UK, I walk on the canals, places like Slathwaite, and you've got these information panels tell you about the Industrial Revolution, but not everywhere has that. Botswana does that well. You go to a lot of the heritage sites there, caves, ancient specularite mines, gorges, you name it. They've done really good work there with information panels, and it attracts tourists. Some of these sites become so important, they become UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and then you get some tourists who they want to tick them all off, they want to visit them all, and I don't blame them, because there's a reason why they've been designated that. Like the Sodilo Hills in northwest Botswana, wow, wonderful. It's a complex of 3 hills covered in rock art that have been done over tens of thousands of years by the San tribes, who are the original occupants of those landscapes. They're the hunter-gatherers.
Yeah.
And So, so economically for local communities, they can really benefit. So when I worked in Fiji, I worked with a local community at a cave they call Voli Voli Cave. In the literature, it was known as the most important fossil site in the whole country. But when I visited the site, there was no information panel. Nobody ever went there.
Wow.
It was owned by some local landowners. And I think in the past, some tourists had occasionally gone to visit, but it stopped for whatever reason. So I just saw huge potential. I'd got some background through my PhD of studying caves.
Yeah.
So I, did the Sevu Sevu with the carver at the ceremony in the village, the local village, worked with the locals. I just said to them, look, this is a win-win situation. You can benefit, we call it sustainable development, where if the resource is not affected, but there can be an economic benefit. And I got a grant from the university. It funded to buy the local materials. So we used local materials like bamboo and some coral deposits. Not the live coral, of course, some coral deposits for footpaths. I got a student involved who helped design an information panel for the site. It ended up being officially opened by the second in command in the government, the Attorney General.
Wow.
And, who kind of cut the ribbon. And so that's another one of my biggest, proudest achievements, actually, for that community. And as far as I know, they're still using it and there's some of the hotels take tourists there. The locals do the guiding. And so it's got a huge potential. And in the Bahamas too, that's what I've been trying to focus on. Some of the challenges, and that was something I did in Botswana as well. I got a student involved from a local village to work on a cave that David Livingstone had once spent a night in, and that was his first conversion that was his first conversion in Africa of somebody to Christianity. The chief said to him, "If you sleep the night in this cave, I'll believe you and your Christianity's power, and I will convert." And he slept the night in the cave. I mean, it was an awful cave, it smells bad. You got bats, rats in there. And he came out the next day. This was in the 1800s. And so that chief converted to Christianity, I think, for a few years, and then he reverted. But a student did a project on that cave as well, like on the geoconservation. Now in the Bahamas, it's a bit more challenging, partly because particularly on the main island, it's a lot of people invest in the Bahamas. It's a tax-free environment.
Yeah,
so you get a lot of very wealthy people, including celebrities, that invest here. So any kind of parcel of land on this main island has got sometimes have a very high cost attached to it. And so people that already own land, and they might have, say, a cave on their property or a blue hole, and it's almost like it's sometimes it's a challenge to find out who the landowner is in the first place.
Yeah.
And then you might have to try and convince them that it could be used, say, for ecotourism. And then, but I know by law the government does own all of these sites of heritage interest, like caves, blue holes. But it might be surrounded by private land. So then there's a challenge of how do you get around that, and who benefits exactly. So it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, sure. Wow, Mark, that does wrap up our show. But this has been a fantastic chat with you. I've personally learned a lot. It's so engaging. I'm sure people who are going to watch this are going to learn a lot as well. I'm sure they're going to be inspired, and I'm sure we've got some future physical geographers that are going to sort of go and head in that direction for a career off the back of this.
I hope so.
Yeah,
encourage them.
Absolutely. But Mark, thank you so much for your time. It's been truly great to speak to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Thanks for this opportunity and to share my experiences. So Yeah, it's been, I've really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, our pleasure. Yep, Mike, Steve, everyone, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben.